indicate by saying aye. Delegate Corrigan, when you are ready, assume the lectern. We will distribute the substitute and proceed, and then Delegate Miller will be following you, and that will complete our subcommittee business. Members of the subcommittee, with Delegate Corrigan is ready, turn your attention to him for House Bill 2203, Amendment Nature Substitute. Without objection, we'll adopt the Amendment Nature Substitute, which is being distributed before you, which is a Section 1 bill with an emergency clause. Delegate Corrigan, you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2203. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, the substitute for this bill directs the Department of Housing and Community Development to include for consideration in the current Uniform Statewide Building Code update process the issue of notice for manufactured home park tenants when the manufactured home park owner is cited for violations of the building code that jeopardizes the health and safety of the tenants. This language has the support of the Virginia Association of Counties, the Virginia Building Code Officials Association, the Virginia Manufacturing Modular Housing Association, the Virginia Municipal League, and the Virginia Poverty Law Center. This recommendation comes to us as a result of some infractions at the East End Modular Park in Manassas.
Thank you, Delegate. Other questions of the Delegate at this point? Let's have those in favor of the substitute step forward and indicate their support with all deliberate speed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Randy Grumbein, Virginia Manufactured Modular Housing Association. It's been a long process to work through this bill, and through our efforts, we've come to a bill that we think is best for preserving the rights of the tenants of the park. So we do support this legislation.
Thank you very much. Next.
Mr. Chairman, Joel Andrus, representing the Virginia Building Code Officials Association. We think the building code process is the proper way to address this and appreciate all of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mara.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Christy Merrill with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. We also support this legislation and look forward to working on the process through the building code.
Mr. Chair, Phyllis Arrigo from the Virginia Association of Counties, also speaking for the Virginia Municipal League, and we also support the substitute. Thank you.
Very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of Delegate Corrigan's legislation? Is there anyone here in opposition to this consensus draft? Hearing none. Delegate Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to report the substitute on House Bill 2203.
Properly seconding. Discussion on the motion to recommend reporting House Bill 2203, Amendment of Nature Substitute. Hearing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much. The bill is recommended to be reported as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have Delegate Miller, who has the omnibus legislation dealing with landlord-tenant law and updates. I think, as has been practice, the subcommittee has been willing to allow Mr. Dix to go through the bill for us. There's a substitute that's being developed, and each year the House Bill 2033 Amendment Nature Substitute will be adopted without objection. It's a lengthy tome, and we appreciate all the hard work of the various stakeholders. House Bill 2033, the substitutes before you. Mr. Dix.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, first of all, let me thank the Office of the Executive Secretary, the Attorney General's Office, Virginia Poverty Law Center, all the real property groups. I'm not aware of any opposition to this bill. There is one technical amendment that I'll offer at the appropriate time to deal with unclaimed property. Worked it out with the treasurer today. It's sort of a placeholder. It's not final language, but we'd like to adopt that language at the appropriate time.
Okay.
The big picture here is this issue came, and this concern came out of the Code Commission work group. And we looked at the fact that for single-family houses, there's the Virginia Landlord Tenant Act, which is muddled in with commercial recodified in Title 55.1 in 2018, hopefully, what would happen is there'd be one residential act, one commercial act, and it will be streamlined for practitioners and all users of landlord-tenant law. So in order to do that, since the Code Commission can only do non-substantive issues, this bill is necessary, which I apologize for the length of it, but basically, fundamentally what this bill does is take provisions out of the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act and puts them over in the Virginia Landlord-Tenant Act for residential dwelling units. So at the end of the day, if this legislation passes, then the Code Commission will be able to say there's one residential act and be able to go through and correct that. So one of the substantive changes is that right now, if you want to be under the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act and you're a single-family house, then you have to opt in to the VRLTA. What we will do under this act is you will opt out of the residential act into the exempt properties. So basically, you would opt out of the VRLTA into the VLTA. And so that is fundamentally what's there. Mr. Chairman, I can walk through this bill to the extent that you'd like me to walk through this bill. I would say that, and let me just highlight some pages, and I think that will probably help the subcommittee.
Yeah, Mr. Diggs, Doug Greason has a question for Chris. Welcome the patron to really illuminate us further. Thank you.
Glad I can do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dix, thank you very much every year. This is my 8th, others have been here longer, and we have something that looks similar to this almost every year. If I just heard you correctly, is it anticipated that once we get to a point where there's kind of one commercial act and one residential act, that we would not see what I would consider a complete rewrite every year, or is it just that dynamic of an area of law that we're going to continue to see? And I don't have a problem with it. I'm not speaking against the bill. I'm just trying to educate myself on where we are in this journey to kind of settle on one act for commercial, one act for residential. I don't know, are we halfway through? Are we towards the tail end, or is this something that happens for 4 or 5 more years?
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that, Delegate Greason, that I would no longer be sentenced to having to do this kind of work every year. I hope that what will happen is that the omnibus bill, if you will be 4 or 5 code sections instead of 86 pages worth of code sections. And what we'll end up with, if this passes and when the Code Commission completes its work for the 2018 session, is you'll have a residential act, but this still preserves the right for somebody who has 2 or less residential units in the same name for them to be exempt, but they would have to opt out of the residential act. All the commercial provisions are controlled by the leases, and the statute would make that clear. And then there'd be a provision for manufactured housing. And so and there'll be general provisions that apply to all residential and all commercial. So I think at the end of the day, to answer your question, I don't anticipate that we will have another substantial bill again in the finite future. And the reason is because we'll have one residential act.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Doug. Good question.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you look on page 1 and page 2 and 3, basically this is the existing law of the Virginia Landlord-Tenant Act. And on page 3 at the bottom of the page, there's currently certain sections, and there's 19 sections that have been brought over from the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act into the Virginia Landlord-Tenant Act. So on page 4, this is the new provision, if you will, that says the applicability. And again, it preserves the existing exemptions for the most part. But what it does is to make it clear as to what the coverage is in this law. And then beginning on page 6, these are the definitions straight from the VRLTA that have been put into the VLTA. That takes you over to page 11. And the same thing, all of these sections are being updated. The changes on pages 11, 12, all the way up to about page 33. All of those are sections that are being brought over or conform to the existing sections of the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. And there's very minor changes in there that again have been agreed to with all the parties. Moving on over to pages 46, 47, all the way to page 49, that completes the transfer of the VRLTA provisions into the VLTA. on page 49. So that's the guts of the bill, is taking the existing VRLTA provisions and moving them over. Beginning on page 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, and over to page 54, those are the remaining provisions of the Virginia Landlord-Tenant Act that are being clarified to apply to non-residential properties. And on page 55 is where the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act begins, and those sections all the way to the end of the bill basically conform and reconcile with provisions of the VLTA. And so, the one,
Mr. Dix, that's where you have the opt-out provision, is that correct? And B, line 1452
that is correct.
applies to the two properties. However, just so members of the committee can track what you had posited at the beginning and this new concept.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, and you see on lines 1454 where the landlord owns no more than 2 single-family in their own name, such landlord may opt out. And so again, the standard beginning July 1 is everybody would be covered under the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act unless they opt out.
And to that end, how do they exercise that option?
So the way they exercise that option, if they fall into the category, first of all, it would be limited to single-family homeowners. Secondly, it would be only those persons who own in their own name 2 or less investment properties. And what they would do is they put in their lease that we hereby exempt ourselves from the VRLTA, and we're subject to Chapter 13 of Title 55 in the Rental Code of Virginia. So they just do it in the lease. So, Mr. Chairman, in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, and again, I'm happy to answer any questions detailed on any of this that you'd like, probably more than you'd like. I had a discussion with the state treasurer this afternoon and her legal team and her executive team, and there are provisions that deal with security deposits, and that's in subsection 19 on page 21. And the concern is with respect to beginning on line about 550 or 549, it says, escheat the balance of the security deposit to the Commonwealth, which shall be sent to the state treasurer and credit the literary fund. So, as you might recall, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, we had this going to the Housing Trust Fund by legislation that dealt with the military back in 2013. And that was determined last year in an interpleader piece of legislation that Delegate Roxanne Robinson carried to be unconstitutional, and that those monies had to go into the literary fund. So as a result of which, we're trying to clean that up here. We thought by referencing the literary fund, that would be sufficient. The treasurer and her legal staff advised that it's necessary to go through the Unclaimed Property Act. So that's a 5-year process instead of a 1-year process that's currently in the legislation. So what we worked out in concept is a draft that I provided to Maria. And basically, if I could just read that one sentence. So it would go at the end of, it would say at the end of the 45-day time period on line 548, comma, says the landlord shall, and then instead of shall, it would read, may remit such sums to the state treasurer on a form developed by the administrator of unclaimed property that includes the name, social security number if known, last known address, zip code if known, of any tenant on the rental agreement. And what that effectively would do would be to allow the Division of Unclaimed Property to receive the money at the end of a year in 45 days, but they would hold it for another 4 years under the 5-year provision of unclaimed property. And if a tenant wanted to come back and claim that during that additional 4-year period, they would be able to do that through the state process. And so
that would replace and strike through 51 where it says fund period.
yes, that's correct.
Is there a motion to accept that as a friendly amendment?
So moved.
Second. Moved and properly seconded. All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? We have accepted that amendment, subject to wordsmithing as necessary.
Mr. Chairman, there's one other place where that exact same language needs to go, and that's on page 70. And that would be on line 1848, where it says that the 45-day period, the landlord shall. We would insert the same language, may remit such sums and so on, as previously read.
Through fund on 1852. Without objection, we'll adopt the same.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that is the bill, and we very much appreciate Delegate Miller carrying this bill for us, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Delegate Miller, would you like to offer any comments at this point in support of your legislation as amended?
I don't want to grab feet in the jaws of victory.
Okay. Anyone here to support this legislation as amended, please step to the lectern and indicate the same. Okay. Anyone here in opposition to this legislation as amended? We have a recommendation, a motion to recommend reporting as amended, House Bill 2033 amendment nature substitute. Probably second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The bill is recommended for reporting as amended. Thank you very much. And that concludes. One opposed. No, I'm opposed. Yes. Okay. We wanted to make that notation accurately. Thank you so much. Okay, and with that, that completes our business for subcommittee number 1.